he's our host. Here he is.
Okay, good work. Thanks, Kirsten.
That's better.
Fantastic. Kirsten, I've made you the host.
Oh, okay, great. All right, I will wait 1 more minute and then we'll start. 2 more minutes. I can't see Jordan.
No, I don't think he's here yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, hello everybody. And welcome to the very first Monday Forum for 2021. I am Kirsten Black and I'll be facilitating tonight's session, and I have the very great honour of introducing our guest speaker and facilitating the Q&A. But before we get started, I want to give an overview of the format of tonight and say a little bit about what the Monday Forum is and what we're trying to do here. The Monday Forum is a group of Australian citizens connected by our interest in politics at its best. We see our purpose as bringing people together to discuss what good politics and good governance looks like, and to contribute to a shared understanding of its foremost elements, being a regard for unity, truth, human dignity, and common goods. We don't all agree on what these elements are or how they're constituted, but we do believe that the conversation on these matters contributes to a healthy civic life and government accountability. The forum meets every first Monday of the month and is open to everyone. We meet for an hour, which consists of an address by our guest speaker, followed by a Q&A session. Please write your questions into the chat and I'll read them out in the order that they arrive, more or less. And if you would prefer to explain your question yourself, please just unmute yourself and say something when your question is queued. The only condition we have is that the questions be a question and not an opinion or comment, but please feel free to add comments to the chat box as well. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can. I should also mention that the session is recorded, and I've forgotten to press the record button. There it is. It is now being recorded. And the recording will be available on our up and coming website. So tonight our discussion will be led by Jose Ramos Horta, former president of Timor-Leste and recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize for his work bringing to resolution the decades-long struggle for East Timor independence. Given last night's terrible news about the detention of Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar, we're only too aware of how sheltered our political reality is in Australia and how prescient this conversation with you is tonight. Welcome, Jose, and thank you indeed for joining us this evening. I would also like to welcome Kevin Bailey, who's the former Honorary Consul General of East Timor, who's in our audience tonight. Thank you, Kevin, for being here and for sharing in our discussion. And I'd also like to thank Jordan Grantham, who's responsible for inviting Jose. I would like to invite you, Jordan, if you'd like to give the thank you note to Jose at the end of this session. But now, please, everyone, join me in welcoming Jose Ramos Horta to give the inaugural 2021 Monday Forum address. I'll just unmute you. Or maybe you could unmute yourself. There.
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, good evening to all of you across Australia and elsewhere that you might be tuning in. I'm speaking from Dili, Timor-Leste. In the midst of the pandemic that is shaking, devastating much of the world, that brought to its knees major powers, the superpower, United States, Russia, France, UK, Germany. We in Timor-Leste, one of the most fragile countries, blessed by God, aided by good decisions taken by our government, supported by friends, Australia included, in particular the United Nations system, the whole, but particularly still WHO, which President Donald Trump had declared public enemy #1 at the beginning of the pandemic. We have managed to escape almost unscathed the pandemic. Partly has to do with geography, partly has to do with the fact that we never had hundreds of thousands of tourists flocking to Timor-Leste from across the region. But in March, our government took drastic decisions that we knew would be negatively impacting on our fragile economy, like closing the airport, curtailing arrivals through the land border, a lot of education of our people, mask using, hand washing, avoiding gatherings, and for the first time ever in the history of this country, so Easter last year, Easter like Christmas, like most Sundays, hundreds of thousands of people participate. So to tell the very faithful Timorese Catholic that you cannot go to church, it was not an easy decision. But our people absolutely complied with. The Catholic Church showed leadership by taking initiative in moving the masses to online, or television or radio. And there was zero protest of any sort in the country to curtailing of individual freedom of movement. There was never a complete lockdown. People were able to go shopping and go to the market. Hotels mostly closed down anyway because the few guests who would come didn't come, so hotels were empty. So far, a bit over 1 year since the pandemic started, we have a 0 fatality, 0 community transmission from March, February till today, a total of about 60 cases identified, every one of them treated and cured. So no fatality. I don't know if you are, please let me know if you are listening to me, where the communication, because I don't see anybody actually. Okay, I think now I can see some of you.
We hear you loud and clear.
You hear loud and clear. Okay, good. Okay, so I personally have been extremely active since February, alerting our authorities to take measures. I remember my conversation with the Prime Minister, Taur Mataruak, a good man from the mountains of Timor-Leste. He was part of the struggle for 24 years. And I remember telling the President of the Republic the same. He came from 24 years of fighting. I went to see Shanana because I was probably the most international, and I was fully aware of the potential of this pandemic. And so I told Taur Mataruak, the Prime Minister, better that you are criticized for overreacting, that you are later criticized for complacency, for not making drastic decisions. And I organized for him to see WHO. I organized for the President to see WHO, to be briefed by technical people. And we developed this strategy to prevent Timor-Leste from falling victim of this. Of course, COVID, as you know, in Australia and around the world, it is impacting the economies of the world. And I've been active with Professor Muhammad Yunus, Grameen Bank, Nobel Peace Prize. I have been involved with Kailas Satyarthi, Nobel Peace Prize from India, with Oxfam, with the Club of Madrid of former leaders, presidents, prime ministers. I've been involved with many other institutions around the world on trying to impress upon the G7, G20 countries to make the vaccine a common good of humanity. Being this pandemic, being this COVID, affecting the whole world, and obviously the developing countries, the fragile states, would suffer the most. Hundreds of millions of people would be thrown into poverty, back into poverty. We have made progress the last 20, 30 years. Many hundreds of millions of people graduated from extreme poverty into at least average above the poverty line. But COVID throw back all these gains of the last 20 years. So first is to appeal to everyone's conscience, the conscience of G7, G20, and others. Show real leadership and show humanity. Make the vaccine not a commercial opportunity, not another opportunity for profit, but make it a compassionate initiative for the whole world, that we come together because this COVID is affecting the whole human family. Of course, some of the members of this human family, like you in Australia, our human family, you are the richer cousins. The North Americans are the richer cousins. But even in countries in Asia like India, you have those who live in high rises, in expensive penthouses. They look down to the shanty towns of Delhi. They see their cousins, their brothers, their sisters, who live in extreme poverty in contrast to the opulence of the upper class in India. And this all over the world. And yet we're all part of the human family. But some are poor cousins. And so myself, Muhammad Yunus, and many others, several hundred international personalities, we wrote, we spoke out. And of course, there has been an initiative of WHO and there have been many countries, more than I think 100 countries sign up on the COVAX, the vaccine. And I have to say, the Australian Prime Minister a few months ago made a statement, which I think was the first Western leader to come out with this generous initiative on allocating $500 million for Southeast Asian countries, Pacific, and the Timor-Leste. Immediately, myself and the Professor Muhammad Yunus, we wrote to the Prime Minister to praise, commend him, and thank him for this initiative. And we haven't heard any other country. We haven't heard from the United States. We haven't heard from European Union. A similar generous initiative in, for instance, those in Europe supporting the poor countries in North Africa and elsewhere. But as much as the COVID expanded rapidly, also science acted rapidly as never before in history. In 1 year, a number of vaccines are developed, already applied on people. In Timor-Leste, we will have it by probably in May. And we gain 1 year, preventing COVID. And with the vaccine coming, maybe we will survive, because if we have a pandemic here in Timor-Leste with malnutrition, with high tuberculosis and other diseases, it will be devastating. So God has helped us, blessed us with no COVID casualty, no COVID fatality. Now, we are conversing today against the background of what's happening in Myanmar. Extraordinary. But, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I have been a lonely voice for the past few years telling the good Western liberal people, telling the Secretary General of the United Nations, the European Union in Brussels, I was the lonely voice. Please do not judge Suu Kyi too harshly. She is alone fighting off the military. The military were observing every move she made. I've been to Myanmar countless times. I went to Myanmar first time ever sometime in 1993, 94. And since, I know Suu Kyi has met with her a few times in Yangon after her liberation, her release. Here you have this woman managing the relationship with the military. The military manipulating the Buddhist monks, manipulating the majority of the Burmese ethnic group, the Burmese, manipulating, poisoning, using social media to agitate against the Rohingya, the Muslims in general. And of course, Suu Kyi did what she thought she had to do, to buy time, to gain time, to survive. She managed to survive for 5 years after the first election, 2015. But the international community, everyone outcast Suu Kyi. Instead of understanding that she is leading an extremely complex transition with the military still all-powerful. I said it countless times. Of course, people would expect that Suu Kyi would show moral leadership on the case of the Rohingya. Yes, she could. She'll be out the next day. If Suu Kyi were to make a statement, mild statement, a few years ago, a statement like this, for instance, appealing to the nation, let's be compassionate to our brothers and sisters, the Rohingya. They are our people. They are our brothers and sisters. Well, you know what would happen? Within 48 hours, there'll be hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating in the streets, partly spontaneously, partly orchestrated by the military, in complicity with the hardline Buddhist monks, ethno-nationalists. Should have been out in the first few months of her taking office, 2015. So now, what is going to be the situation? Well, the military probably took, some inspiration from the now ex-president of the United States, Donald Trump. Donald Trump tried to orchestrate coups in Washington. He praised, commended authoritarian rulers. The only one he didn't commend was China, because China is a strategic, they view as a strategic rival to the United States, but very friendly to Putin of Russia, very friendly to Erdogan of Turkey, of the authoritarian leader of Brazil, and so on. Well, the military, over the last few years, they heard and heard and heard Donald Trump. But they miscalculate. With President Biden in office, someone who has had direct experience of what coup attempts are, of instigating people, instigating counter-democracy, instigating intolerance, racism. Well, I believe that they miscalculated. The US, hopefully working with the European Union, hopefully reaching out to China. It is in President Xi Jinping, in the interest of President Xi Jinping, also to reach out to the United States, to President Biden, the two major powers, one neighbor of Myanmar, so China has direct interest, strategic interest. I hope that President Xi Jinping will show wisdom and reach out to the United States, and I hope that President Biden show wisdom and reach out to Xi Jinping, restart the relationship that was damaged by President Trump, and try to prevent the situation in Myanmar from getting worse. It is tragic for ASEAN countries, but I believe that not all is lost. We will see in the next few days, few weeks, probably a lot of people protest in Myanmar, maybe by the hundreds of thousands. I believe, I hope there will be no bloodshed. So anyway, this is one of the numerous challenges the international community is facing. I have written something that will be aired sometime next week, actually this week in UK. The title is A World Adrift, Challenge and Leadership. Challenges, leadership. Well, if you look at our world, what it has been the last 5 years, yes, we have had leadership. Yes, but a leadership that is dragging the world into the abyss. A leadership that obviously that is the United States, President Trump, that emasculate the United Nations and its agencies, emasculate foreign aid, damage the all transatlantic relationship, United States, European Union, an European Union consumed by Brexit, and on top of it came the COVID and the global economic recession. And so far, we have not seen whether the G7 or the G20 coming up with a common vision and the plan of action, seizing on this challenge that is also an opportunity to bring the world together. First, as I said earlier in my comments, make the vaccine a true common good for humanity. No one should get rich out of the misery of the humanity. Make it a common good for humanity. Second, countries, creditor countries, the World Bank, IMF, the regional banks like Asia Development Bank and other regional banks in Africa and so on, commercial banks should either write off entirely the debt of the poorest countries of the world. First, the fragile states, the countries of the so-called LDCs, least developed countries, write off completely their debt, maybe restructure, freeze interest payments. But I have argued this way back early last year. Since March, I began to argue it. At least all the way till the end of 2021, freeze interest rates. During this period, yes, negotiate to restructure the debts. At the same time, Western countries, because look, we all consume, obviously, with the pandemic, it's natural. And I'm not blaming United States or European Union. I wouldn't blame Australia if Australia were to be focused on Australians. But Scott Morrison, Prime Minister, had the heart, the vision to actively allocate money for ASEAN, Southeast Asia, for Pacific, and Timor-Leste, for its immediate neighborhood. And of course, Australia also contributed to this global fund that was initiated by WHO. But I would have understood, how can I criticize Americans? They are on their knees. How can I criticize the Europeans? But the reality is this is an opportunity to bring the world together. So no one should be becoming rich. Pharmaceutical companies should not become rich, filthy rich out of COVID. Banks around the world, hundreds of millions of people thrown into poverty, and not only the poor countries. Middle class in the United States, in Europe, I presume in Australia. So write off the debt or renegotiate, postpone. Federal government, central government, yes, look at how also to protect the banks from going bankrupt because of COVID. But it should not be only the responsibility of governments. So my proposal, which many people would say, well, Jose Ramos Horta is romantic. What he's proposing is undoable, not realistic. Well, I would say to particularly if governments are the ones who talk like that, I say, excuse me, spare me your platitudes, spare me your lectures on realism and pragmatism, because precisely because of your people, the powers of the world, neglecting these public health challenges, that we are in a mess we are today. Not me, it's you, the big powers. So then I would say, I would invite 10,000 richest banks in the world, 10,000 richest companies, corporations of the world, 10,000 richest foundations, 10,000 richest individuals, men and women, 10,000 richest universities. Develop an initiative that we could call, to make the speech easier, a Marshall Plan for the world. Working together with international institutions, with the UN, the huge private sector of today that didn't exist 50 years ago. Today, there are trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in the hands of the private sector, not in the hands of governments. The brains are in the private sector. Well, unfortunately, some of the worst people go into politics. I don't want to offend anyone, any politician in Australia. I don't want to offend any politician in Timor-Leste. But some of the best brains always go to the private sector. Go to the banks, go to the corporations, and then some of the most mediocre go to politics. So we have to bring together government leaders, officials, and the private sector to devise a strategy to get us out of this global recession and a whole new approach to development. From the lessons we have learned of the last 50 years, what has failed in terms of foreign aid, how to redress, to stop global warming, what kind of energy, what kind of development, sustainable development we can do. We have this chance. I think I have run out of the 30 minutes.
That's wonderful.
So it's 6:30, yeah? So I think that's it, no?
That's
so
fantastic.
What I said was primarily to pick your brains, to provoke you. I don't pretend to have definitive answers. So I throw this to provoke you to think and to challenge me.
Fantastic. That's really great. There's so many things that came up. Yes, wealth inequality is a very big issue, and the fermentation of populist ideas in social media and how that's working in in our democracies. To start off, Jordan has very quietly put up his hand to ask a question first, so I'll throw to him and ask away, Jordan.
Oh, thanks, Kirsten. Well, thank you, Jose, for your speech. You spoke about human rights challenges in Myanmar as well as in Timor-Leste. And I noticed that you spent much of your exile during the occupation of Timor-Leste in study and preparing yourself to engage with the questions of the common good and human rights more effectively. What study and forms of ongoing learning would you recommend for people like us who are interested in issues of the common good and good government?
Well, I would say, actually, I didn't spend too much time to study. Whenever I was able to study, I would study evenings, weekends because during the period I was abroad, my mission in life was to advocate. So every single day I would go to the United Nations in New York. I'd go to Washington, D.C. I know when I look at the U.S. Media and I look at the politicians there, I know most of them. Of course, some they long retired or died, but so many I still know them. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, I know her very well. I met Joseph Biden. I met his son. I know most of the Kennedy family. So this was a part of my work for 24 years, lobbying in and out New York, Washington, D.C., travel across the U.S., Europe. I travel Greyhound in the United States. I travel trains in Europe. I travel bus in Europe, going everywhere, knock at people's door. So my first responsibility was to inform, to awake consciousness. Yes, at the same time I studied. I studied human rights law in Strasbourg, in France, at the International Institute of Human Rights in Strasbourg. I studied public international law at the Academy, the Hague Academy of International Law in The Hague. And so it doesn't matter really what you study, you know. It doesn't matter whether you study law, international relations, economics. In any field that you choose, you feel that you should, that you like, that you really like it. But then, no matter who you are, because I know many Nobel laureates who are not Peace Prize winners, they are scientists who are wonderful human beings, who care about peace, who care about humanity. I know many journalists, absolutely caring people. I know many bankers. You know, one is Kevin Bailey. You know, one, I don't know whether it's correct to call Kevin a banker, but a fund manager. And well, he was not only concerned about managing his company, but was his wife and all the whole family have and engage with Timor-Leste, like many other people in Australia across the board. So it doesn't matter really. Important is your heart is in the right place in what concerns humanity, particularly in what concerns the poor and the weak. If you're not concerned about the rich and powerful, God will forgive you. But you should be concerned about the rich, the poor, and the weak. How to help them? Well, not by philanthropy alone. You know, I remember many years ago, I met through a friend in New York, I met an Israeli gentleman. He was only in his 30s. I forgot his name now. Extremely rich, apparently was involved in hedge funds. And I tried to bring him to Timor. I want him to come to Timor. He had his own private jet. And we never really worked out to come. Then one day, he frustrated, he told me, Jose, why don't they just give you $2 million and you do whatever you want with it? And I just cannot travel to Timor. So I told him, listen, I don't want your money. I want your brains. I want you to come to Timor-Leste and show us how to transform the country. So philanthropy is, yes, very important for emergency situations. People need to eat. People need to drink water, clean water, need a house. But for the long term, people like you in the forum, yes, might be able to help countries like Timor-Leste be a self-sustaining economy to address poverty. So it doesn't matter what you study. Jordan.
Kevin, would you like to respond to that and maybe ask your questions?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Ramos Horta. it's great to get your wisdom. And one of the things that we can say is you're a romantic. There's nothing wrong with being a romantic. The world is a much more pleasant place when there's more romance. That's all I've got to say. But we do have problems when we look at, for example, China, which has got some very good things that it can do. But also when we see the democracy protesters in Hong Kong being crushed and the human rights abuses. And, when we're talking about politics, it's always a fine line that you've had to walk, where you don't just criticize a country, but at the same time, you cannot tolerate injustice when it's going on. And so some of the words of wisdom that you might have to deal with these sorts of issues, because Timor has had, where there's been huge criticism of Indonesia, for example, and yet the Timorese have forgiven and worked collaboratively with the Timorese and the Indonesians working together. And then when we see things like China, we've got to deal with China. How do we deal with a country like China, which is becoming incredibly powerful? There's the Uyghurs in Western China. There's the Hong Kong democracy protesters. Those sorts of things. We can't allow that to go and put aside and just be chasing after money, as a lot of people in Australia want to do. And we have to try to balance these things up. So can you help us to really think about how we deal with those contradictory responses that we sometimes feel we've got to make?
Yes, of course, that is a hugely important question, very difficult to answer. We all know China is now the second largest economy of the world. I think it is going to be non-stop moving forward. It is the biggest investor in the United States, probably in Europe as well, trillions and trillions of dollars in US Treasury bonds, in US economy. If the Chinese were to pull out their investments in US economy, the dollar would collapse, but same, it would be shooting themselves in the foot. So what to do? I don't buy the notion that China is out to dominate the world. They are smart enough, wise enough to know that Chinese economy growth, prosperity depends on the rest of the world. I said this 10 years ago in a speech in Delhi when I was president, and I say it again. Chinese growth, prosperity, its ability to almost eradicate extreme poverty. Yes, thanks to their hard work, but it's thanks also to peace, stability around them, peace, stability in the world, thanks a lot to the prosperity of Australia, European Union countries, the United States, and others. So China is vulnerable. It is one of the poorest countries in the world when it comes to strategic resources. They have to go out to the African continent looking for strategic minerals and looking for food. They go all the way to Latin America, particularly Brazil, looking for food. They have to feed 1.4 billion people. And at the same time is an aging population. I have given lectures in China, Tsinghua University. I spoke at the Chinese Military University. And I told them bluntly once, I said, yes, China has one really interesting dilemma. I don't comment on the way they did population control. But they succeeded what they set out to do in stop the population demographic explosion. the so-called one-child policy. They succeeded in doing that. They succeeded in prolonging the lives of people. So life expectancy now is almost like in the United States, Europe, and Australia. As a result of this, China also has the same old problem of Europe and of Japan, aging population. I said this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and I said, how you are going to deal, I spoke off the top of my head at that time, and I said, in 20, 30 years from now, you will have at least 300 million people or more over the age 60, 65, 70. How we are going to do that? And the Europeans, the Americans, they resolve these problems, Australia, with migration, refugees. China, like Japan, like South Korea. Well, South Korea has a lot of foreign workers. But United States replenishes its population with migrants, more and more. Europe has this terrible problem of aging population, but functioning democracies, a strong social welfare, but less and less people producing for more and more people who are in retirement age. So I told the Chinese, superpowers are made of young people. And of course, my sense of humor is different from a Chinese sense of humor. I said at the time, even if you install a missile in every wheelchair, you cannot fight the Americans. Because the United States is still a very young population. It's an incredibly resilient country, resilient society. Of course, Donald Trump, put a pause on that, but the United States replenished with immigration, with refugees, and China has had a different history. So they have a serious problem ahead of them. The same time, China has, while the United States has the vast Pacific Ocean, the vast Atlantic Ocean in front of them, without any barriers. A superpower should have a freedom of access to the oceans around it. China doesn't have that because there are too many countries very close to China. So they came up with this South China Sea, the 9 dash line. Well, they have to be extremely careful dealing with their neighbors. This is an extremely sensitive situation. And at the same time, United States, Australia, UK decide to move military vessels into the South China Sea. Well, one day there will be a miscalculation of an error by some pilots, and then you have a military situation escalate. So there has to be very serious discussions between the major powers, the United States, China, and others, for early warning systems, for dialogue to lessen the tensions in the South China Sea. We have enough problems with Korea, North Korea. We have enough problems with China and India, India and Pakistan. We don't need an additional problem. So in terms of human rights, well, the reality is this. Because of Chinese history of instability, civil war, they are extremely sensitive about any mass movement, pro-democracy movement that can have a nefarious effect on the Chinese stability. That's for them is the #1 priority. How they should deal with it, because the more the Chinese progress, prosper, well, the more freedoms they are demanding. But Chinese today is not China of 50 years ago, 30 years ago. It's much more open than that. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you don't see Chinese travel freely in the world. Today, by the millions they travel. So they expose to the rest of the world, the freedom in the rest of the world. And this necessarily is impacting inside China. But for the Chinese, it is on their own clock, their own time. Maybe I didn't answer your question as you desire, but that's what I can offer.
Staying on the theme of China, there's another question circling back to the coronavirus, and it's from Martin, and it reads, how can we put our faith in international institutions such as the WHO when the pandemic was exacerbated by their relaying Chinese propaganda, for example, regarding whether the coronavirus can be passed between people, etc.?
Could you repeat the question?
So I think, I mean, Martin, please feel free to ask it yourself, but I think it's about the mishandling.
I could try and explain it. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
I was struck by, in your articulating your humanitarian vision about the unity of nations across the world in dealing with particular challenges, you seem to provide a very positive view upon the international institutions like the WHO, the UN, and so on. And I wanted to ask about that just because the very beginning of the pandemic seemed to have been made much worse by the WHO repeating what China was telling them to say, and therefore, not closing down borders and so on with China early on. They're resisting that. And so I just wanted to ask that question, is there a difficulty in having, with the humanitarian vision, being connected to these international institutions rather than between nations themselves?
Well, it is next to impossible to develop any joint, common, universal initiative of this magnitude without involving the existing multilateral institutions, with all their weaknesses, and weaknesses that are created by the rivalries, the mutual suspicion between countries. I think there was too much of harsh judgment of WHO. The WHO, like UN, any UN institution, any UN agency, whether working with the United States, whether working with any major country, well, they have to really strike a very careful balance so that they do not, the host country, do not expel them, create further barriers for the presence of these countries there. And it is entirely untrue that the Chinese dominate the WHO, as Donald Trump said. No, if you know anyone who knows the UN system, countries like the United States, followed by Japan, Europeans, they have the biggest numbers of experts, of officials working in these institutions. Like Timor-Leste, we have maybe one person, because it depends on the quota system that we pay. So the United States always had the biggest numbers, whether in headquarters in New York, whether in any UN agency, particularly those that they heavily fund. For instance, World Food Program. World Food Program, I think 60% of the funding, in-kind support comes from the United States. The head of WFP is always an American. In New York, you have undersecretary generals who are Americans. So it is totally, and during the controversy in March, April, well, there were American scientists working in WHO, in the headquarters in Geneva, who were telling Washington, no, sorry, what you are saying is wrong. Yes, maybe the Director General of WHO was overcautious, I don't know. It was a new pandemic. Even today, we have a new mutations, and no one knows how we started these new mutations. So I wouldn't. In any case, there are no better institutions in the world to the UN system. There are no better institution than WHO, no better institution than UNICEF or any of the. We have to improve. We learn from the challenges. But I have to say one thing, you know, former President George W. Bush, someone who was vilified for different reasons, well, in 2005, if I'm not mistaken, if you can check, go to Google, to YouTube, and you will see a speech he made in 2005 where he alerted to a coming pandemic. Following that speech, a pandemic crisis center or institution was created in the National Security Council in the White House. Obama came, the institution continued, came Donald Trump. This institution that was started by George W. Bush was eliminated. Well, a year later or 2 years later came the pandemic. Donald Trump had, it was convenient for him to blame someone. The easiest scapegoat is China. The easiest scapegoat is WHO.
There's a similar question about the UN and whether it's too political and how it might be depoliticized. Do you agree with that idea at all? Or?
Yeah, it's too political, but the Australian Parliament is also too political. The British Parliament, too political. The US Congress, too political. When you put 193 countries, including Timor-Leste, in the UN, represented by governments, well, you cannot expect Mother Teresa's, the UN is not made of Mother Teresa's. It's made of Putin, made of Xi Jinping, Erdogan, made of other good people from other countries, made of your Prime Minister, Scott, who is a very good man, and Prime Minister of New Zealand. And so that's the UN, very politicized. The thing is, if there were a US president like Barack Obama, or Jimmy Carter, or John Kennedy, or Robert Kennedy, or in Europe, if we had people like Jacques Delors, like François Mitterrand, or other great British leaders and others in the post-World War II, that imagine a new Europe, a Europe that was reconciled. They built the foundations of modern Europe. Maybe we would have a better response to this pandemic. Maybe it would have been prevented. I don't know. But the fact is, as my title of a speech that I'm giving this Friday is, we are in a leaderless world because the last 4 years we have had a US president that, God, I don't have to say much, you all know. And Europe totally distracted by Brexit, consumed European leaders. So that's where we are, leaderless world. The Secretary General is a wonderful human being, Antonio Guterres. Well, Antonio Guterres has been most unfortunate that he took office the same month, same year as Donald Trump. Well, really bad luck. Antonio Guterres started his job on 1st January 2017. Donald Trump started his mandate 20 January 2017. Well,
yeah, if reforming the UN is about leadership, then this next question or last question is a good one to perhaps finish on. It's from It's from Sarath, and it says that you mentioned strongman leaders a few times. What do you think are the reasons we're seeing the rise of populist type leaders?
Well, throughout our history, going back to before World War II, after World War II, when humanity, countries faces certain situations, populist leaders, demagogues emerge with easy solutions. Well, look at what happened with Mussolini in Italy, Hitler in Germany. Well, what demagogues brought us to? They created conditions for World War II. I don't think we are going to have a World War III, but right now in UK, like in much of Europe, people are already seeing the results of extremism, of populism. I'm more optimistic than others that it's not going to be long-lasting, this wave of populism and demagogy in Europe. And United States, look, Joe Biden was elected with a difference of almost 8 million votes. Of course, Donald Trump has 7 million, something like that. I don't remember how many. No, 70-something million votes. People voted for him. For Joe Biden, over 80 million. Well, but not all 70 million who voted for Donald Trump, they are that crazy. And I think slowly you will see situation in the United States, particularly if Joe Biden is able to deliver. He's a very good man, a genuine Catholic, very religious person, with a brilliant vice president. Well, it is very much in the, and whether we like it or not, I keep mentioning the United States, but whether we like it or not, it's still the #1 power in the world. And Joe Biden is going to try to restart the transatlantic relationship. He's going to restart more engagement with the United Nations system to strengthen the UN. He appointed for administrator of USAID Samantha Power, a brilliant academic, brilliant diplomat, politician. I call her politician because although she didn't run for office. Yes, Biden is a Catholic. Yeah, someone I think a question, really? Well, I don't know whether it's a sarcastic question or I saw in the screen. Yes, he is Catholic.
Yeah.
So I guess he meant, the pastor put the question, he meant, well, being a good Catholic, not necessarily a good man or a good person.
We are out of time, and so remains for me just to say thank you to you and thank you to everybody else, for coming and for contributing your question. So it's been a really great discussion. Jordan, would you like to say the thank you for Jose?
Definitely, thank you, Kirsten. But also, I noticed there's some other last-minute questions that Jose, maybe if you have a couple of minutes, would you be, and Kirsten, with your permission, would you be happy to give your thoughts on that? Because
on what?
On a couple of questions have slipped through at the end about President Biden's support of abortion and same-sex marriage in his policies and statements. And so I think it'd be very interesting to see,
Sure.
How can, while Biden has many good qualities, these are very serious issues and some of the biggest issues in the common good and thinking of human rights.
Yeah, entirely understandable that not only Catholics, there are in other religions, people oppose abortion, oppose gay marriage. But gradually over the next years to come, as many Catholics evolve, many Christians evolve, and I believe many Muslims who live in Europe and in Australia and elsewhere, they probably are also in favor of abortion. Because God, you know, abortion is also a health issue, a right issue. You know, if a woman, you know, is pregnant and the doctors say the risk of having a baby is her life, or the baby is will suffer enormously. Well, it is a question of humanity. Today we should think differently. That's God. The notion that against also gay marriage. You know, I was asked this question a few years ago. A Timorese journalist. I was president. I don't know whether he used it, but he asked me. He said, "Mr. President, is going to be a first gay marriage here in Timor at the Portuguese embassy grounds. So a Timorese and a Portuguese gentleman, apparently, they're going to marry at Portuguese grounds, so not in the Timor grounds. Portuguese embassy ground means foreign grounds, Portuguese sovereignty, territory. So we have nothing to do with it. And my explanation is, well, marriage, the concept of marriage, the institution of marriage is one thing. There can be love and there may be no love. There are arranged marriage, and arranged marriage are not only among some Muslim countries or Muslim societies. Also in the European monarchies, particularly over centuries, you know, there was arranged marriage. What is not arranged is love, you know. So if two people, you can call them men, two women, you can call them women. These are human beings. They love each other, so why not? What they do in their house, I don't know. I don't care. That is love is one concept. Marriage, yes, can reflect love. Is a consequence, continuation of love between two people. It is the institution of marriage, but it's also, you know, it's not a crime. It's not an aberration for a man to love another man and let's live together, share our lives together.
Well, Dr.
I can
Ramos, Dr. Ramos Horta, look, I'm very grateful for your honesty and openness in this conversation, though we are running out of time. And on the points of abortion and redefining marriage, I hope that the direction of human rights and the fight for freedom goes in the opposite direction in the years to come. But these qualities of fighting for freedom and human rights are some of the reasons you're much admired around the world, especially your success and ongoing success in advocating for your people in Timor-Leste, to a world that unfortunately is indifferent to the truth in many instances. You work frequently, as you mentioned, with other world leaders as a colleague and mentor in the Global Leadership Foundation, in the Club of Madrid, as you mentioned. So your insights into government and the future of democratic leadership are really come from an insider's perspective and are uniquely well placed to help us understand the discussions and debates that are taking place at the highest level. Thank you for accepting the invitation and sharing your insights with us tonight. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, and God bless you all the very best. I would love to visit Australia again. I miss Australia, I miss Sydney, I miss Melbourne, I miss Darwin, miss Brisbane. I have been stuck in Timor since January last year, but I am enjoying it. I am enjoying not traveling. And
I can just say thank you.
God bless you all.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.